Hey, Satanico here once again for God Loves Comics, and this is Alex Toth's most surprising portfolio. So here we have a relatively obscure and overlooked Toth portfolio from Savage Tales of Conan, number 64 from 1981, which came out at a time when Jim Shooter was still editor-in-chief and Louise Jones, prior to marrying Walt Simonson and becoming Louise Simonson, was still the editor. I've seen it written that the Marvel Age of the 1960s, and specifically Jack Kirby style, effectively ended Toth's mainstream career as we know it, because Toth couldn't possibly draw superheroes with the same visceral power as Jack Kirby, or even the many Jack Kirby clones. On one hand, looking at Toth's animation cells and character designs, as well as his occasional commissions of superheroes, although the work is unquestionably beautiful in its simplicity, it does lack the muscular appeal of Kirby and all the best superhero artists of the era. Of course, an artist of Toth's supreme skill could surely ape Kirby, or at least appropriate a similar visceral style if he wanted to. Although no one could hope to ape Kirby's imagination, just as it would be hopeless to crack the code inside Mobius's mind. But Toth's approach to action had an antiquated romanticism based in heroes such as Zorro and the Lone Ranger. No matter the harshness in Toth's words and critiques of his peers, there was a softness in the punches of his protagonist. See my Frank Frazetta Genius of Violence video for how to land a punch. Indeed, even the artists Toth praised, like Golden Age stalwart Arthur Casanueve, were nowhere near the visceral level of a Kirby or a Lufine. But perhaps seeing the writing on the wall as far as a monumental shift towards superheroes, as well as recognizing that a character like the Dark Knight, roaming the shadows of Gotham's noir metropolis, might be perfect for his approach, Toth sometimes submitted Batman drawings and concepts to the DC offices in an apparent appeal to DC editors for the plum assignment, only to have submissions fall on deaf ears. When you consider a character like Batman, who lives in the shadows and moves within the margins, Toth's exquisite command of black and negative space sounds like a no-brainer. But the closest we got to a Toth Batman, aside from a meager 11-page story with Archie Goodwin and Detective Comics 442, was likely David Mazzucchelli's turn on Batman Year One, and the lone cover the brilliant former DC editor Mark Schiarello solicited from Toth for the original Batman black and white miniseries, and for which Toth supplied one of the most minimalistic drawings of his entire career. All this said, Toth seems a bizarre choice for a Conan story, given that implacable do-gooders such as Zorro and the Lone Ranger were typically Toth's period characters of choice. But again, Toth seemed to be actively fishing for work among the big two, perhaps in between animation jobs, or just from force of habit, having done so much sporadic comics work throughout his career. The tiny introductory blurb to the Toth portfolio reads as follows. Alex Toth has long been acclaimed as one of the leading innovators in comics today. His genius for black and white design is unparalleled and undisputed. Here he turns his talents to rendering some select scenes from the yet as untold tales of Conan the Barbarian. Unquote. This pre-Wikipedia bio is about as utilitarian as possible, and unfortunately, as far as I know, those Conan stories remained untold. Seeing Toth's art unfold over even a short 8-page Savage Sword story would have been fascinating, but while the writing on Conan was always competent, it's unlikely the story itself would have been anything groundbreaking, but that was an impediment that Toth faced most of his comics career. Still, seeing any Alex Toth work is always a treat, but what's so interesting about these Conan pieces is the tantalizing glimpse at what the fabled barbarian would have looked like in Alex Toth's hands. It's hard to know whether Toth was just flexing his immense chops or trying to offer up at least one approach that would catch Marvel's jaundiced eyes. But one thing is very clear. Toth was quite capable of drawing superheroic action when and if he wanted to. While there was no shortage of ink on every page, the expected Toth minimalism and spotting of blacks is rarely present, as he instead opts for washes and details, except in a few high-concept compositions. The first image has Conan almost floating in combat in what looks like the mouth of a dark cave. His arms are bound by a healthy portion of spaghetti rope, so Conan is kicking one of the nebulous assailants off with his left leg, even as another cloaked and even less well-defined figure menaces him from the back. For some reason, I thought the head here was some sort of cycloptic eye from a creature recessed in the cave at first. This is Conan after all, but it's also Toth's Conan, not Gil Kane's, and after a moment I realized it was only the pained face and agape mouth of one of Conan's captors. It's hard to surmise what exactly Conan has done to him, given that Conan's hands are tied and his legs face forward. Maybe a particularly brutal backwards headbutt. Regardless, the scene is a bit static, but the motion of the capes lends it a little energy. We also see a more detailed musculature than typical with classic Toth. Conan's defined pecs and abs are still very much within realistic proportions and well short of Schwarzenegger's once cartoonish physique, but still a bit unusual for Toth. The next splash is drawn with a similar approach of dominant washes instead of Toth's renowned rivers of purest black. Toth also dresses his previously static Conan with a much more vibrant action pose and a histrionic facial expression, although the pose of the legs and exceptionally lumpy knees is a bit odd. Toth populates the foreground with the round faces of a pair of Mongol-like opponents in equal degrees of agitation and serves up some broken teeth to the mouth of a larger figure on the bottom right to add some character. On an amorphous background that seems to be the interior of a cave, it's easy to overlook a tiny priestess figure in the top right corner who almost blends into the background, but is delineated just enough to be the most elegant figure on the page. The third image on page 49 deploys some classic Tothian expressionist abbreviation. It's a style you may recognize Toth using in his most kinetic jazz illustrations. The image of a massive, likely symbolic figure wielding power over small, helpless Conan, his swords looking particularly impotent, is also a classic construct of political cartooning, often used to illustrate a repressive system of government such as fascism or communism, or a singular dictatorial power, be it a political, military, or religious leader, toying with proletariat strivers. Toth either illustrates multiple hooded figures of a similar angry, tight-lipped countenance, or multiple images of a single figure, since the features from one to the next are the same. While interesting and probably the sort of imagery Toth himself preferred, it lacks the visceral appeal that Marvel's editors and Conan's readers were surely expecting. On the next page, Toth remedies this with a much more traditional stylistic approach for Marvel's licensed Barbarian. Conan seeks to quiet the storm of arrows rising from a ravine below by raining down a massive boulder. It doesn't seem like the best strategy since the boulder served as protection from the flimsy arrows. But it is fine storytelling from Toth, who delivers a bracing action scenario in a single illustration. Toth also draws a few obscured orcish figures in the background who appear to be assailing Conan's cliff. Toth can't help but unleash his design sense as well by placing a Conan title behind the titular character. However, the addition of dots to the edges of the lettering look like rivets in a metal sign, and thus more than a little bit anachronistic. The title design would look more in place in a very primitive and early appearance of Iron Man. By page 51, Toth delivers yet another unique scenario, this time of Conan appearing as a giant while peering down at hostile but tiny troll army that would be more at home in a Mad Magazine parody. This appears more whimsical and comedic than anything else, and again this feels more true to Toth's interest than the straight-line Conan seen throughout the balance of this issue of Savage Sword, which delivers the traditional meat and potatoes barbarian tales in a highly traditional and predictable fashion. The final two images on page 52 and 53 are the most successful of the portfolio, filled as they are with motion, great composition, design work, and multiple characters on the page. On page 52, Toth summons his inner John Buscema, which is no small feat, with a quintessential Conan confrontation. This is Toth just flexing his chops to show that he can play this game as well as the best in the business, although it's almost certain that Samaria is not Toth's preferred milieu. Here Conan's opponent steals the scene. Toth illustrates a composite historical figure most closely resembling a wealthy Ottoman Turk because of the boxy headdress and the girth. The designs, however, could easily be Greek, and even though they are nothing more than patterns of bold, inky squiggles from Toth's brush, they give the page its most striking design elements. But as a warrior's garb, that silky summer dress isn't going to offer much protection. Of course, neither is Conan's fur bikini, but at least he's got a layer of muscle. The final image is a standard Conan action scene brightened by the appearance of a female warrior fighting alongside our favorite barbarian. I'm not even going to hazard a guess about the origins of her outfit, which includes some kind of futuristic thigh-high leggings and a bizarre conical helm complete with a brim and a chin strap. She appears to have entered from another dimension entirely, perhaps only to make Red Sonja's chainmail bikini appear practical by comparison. Last but not least, there is a 7th image on the inside front cover on gloss paper, filled with a wonderful leafy pattern design for drapes that are done in a faint wash that would surely be muddied and less impressive on newsprint pages. These days, a snippet of that pattern might be an original drawing on a computer tablet, then repeated across the page with a few taps of a stylus. It would be interesting to know if Toth was able to request this image to be placed on the inside cover, knowing in advance that this was turf also assigned to him, or if it was simply a wise editorial decision by Louise Jones. Here a bemused Conan is sauntering off through a thicket of swords that, since Toth draws no hands on their hilts, seem to be embedded into the stone floor. A stunning Cleopatra-esque sorceress queen sports a hippie-ish Von Baudet pattern on her copious breast and the blank-eyed expression of an onyx statue. Seated next to her, perhaps suggesting she's the actual queen, is a consort-like figure with a wonderfully cartoony face that could pass in any manga book and with little orbs on her shoulders and kneecaps. It's a tantalizing look at the sort of esoteric and exquisite design Alex Toth would have brought to a Conan graphic novel or miniseries if he had ever gotten the call. All of these images are dated 1980, by the way. Toth's bibliography shows that at the time he had done a little bit of work for Warren on Vampirella and Rook magazine. He was getting little or no work from DC, and his only recent work from Marvel had come 2 years prior for a single Space Ghost gig in 1978's TV Stars number 3. Of course, he may have been working in animation all along, but his work in comics barely crossed over from the Golden and Silver Age into the Bronze Age.